Hi, Scott with 802 Outdoor Adventures here. Thanks for stopping by. It is March 7th and in the springtime here in Vermont, we most of us tap some trees. And what I mean by tapping trees, we gather the sap from the maple trees and we make maple syrup out of it. So today, in this video, I'm going to show you a little bit of how that process works and how we do it. In the background, my buddy Steve's down there. He's been helping me out for years and years. We won't say how many. But we're up in the sugar woods today and we're doing some repairs on some lines. Seems to be a never-ending thing. And let me spin the camera around here and I will show you what this all looks like. We run a pipeline system, and all the sap runs down to the sugar house in the main tank. And later on in this video, we'll go through that whole process down there. But right now, we'll focus on what's going on up in the woods. So let me turn you around here. And you can see on this maple tree here that we have a, there it is, that we have a plastic, this is called the spout right here. And we drill a hole in the tree and we put the spout in and tap it in. That's why we call it tapping. And during the springtime, when the sun comes up and the days get warm, the sap starts to flow. And I would try to explain it, the scientific reasons behind why the sap flows, but I can't, so I'm not going to. But it has to do with freezing temperatures at night and then warming temperatures during the day. The whole contraction expansion thing, and then the barometric pressure has something to do with that, and you know, on and on it goes. But anyway, we'll just suffice it to say that if you drill a hole in a maple tree in the spring, you're going to get some sap out of it eventually. So this sap that comes out of this tree, you can see everything's frozen up today pretty good. It's, what would you say it is, Steve, 30? Yeah, it might be 30 out. With this beautiful sunny blue day, I don't think there's a cloud in the sky. But this is you can see the lines that kind of weave up through the trees. This is, we call a gathering of maple trees in one section of forest, a sugar bush. So these are all sugar maple trees. And we string tubing along, and eventually it goes into a bigger pipe which flows down the hill into a bigger pipe and eventually gets into our sap collecting tank. That's about it. I mean, the holes in the tree we drill, they're 5/16 holes, and we use adapters. These little clear pieces are spout adapters to the 5/16. We replace those every year. We found that gives us a better yield if we do that every year. If you put a dirty spout into the tree, the hole tends to grow bacteria, and then it won't run anymore. So the cleaner you can keep things, the better the sap flows. All right, so we will go down a ways and maybe we'll get down to the next intersection and we'll show you where all our main lines come together. But this is the sugar bush, and there are approximately 1,500 taps in here. And when I say 1,500, each individual tap is counted. And whenever sugar makers get together and say, "Oh, how big's your operation?" it's always usually measured in how many taps you have. Since the advent of the RO machine, you've been able to reduce your equipment size, so you can run a lot smaller evaporator, which we'll get into later on. But usually it's the amount of taps you have when you talk about big operations. We have around 1,500, and the woods goes on and on up through. There's probably 30 acres here or something that we tap, and there's probably 2,000 taps here if we really wanted to stretch it and get everything. But that's more work than I want to do. I'm doing this just for a hobby. So that's it, I think. we will go down to the intersection down below and we'll show you where some group of main lines come together. Smaller pipes into bigger pipes. All right, so we're at another section, and this tree hasn't been tapped. That's what the spout looks like without the adapter on it. And I wanted to show you. You can see in this tree where we've tapped it over the years, all the different tap holes. And if you go around the tree, this tree, if I remember right, there's one right there. That was probably last year's. If I remember right, this is one of the younger trees that we started to tap years ago. And as I look at it, I can see that it's had a lot of tap holes in it. And it's still alive. A lot of these trees, because they grew up so close together, are nice and tall and straight, don't have big crowns. And that's what we call the top of the tree. See, you can see how skinny and small the crowns are. And that does affect the quality of your sap after a while. Well, not after a while. That does affect the quality of your sap. The more leaves, it's the leaves that convert the sunlight to the sugar that feed the trees in the spring when the sap starts to flow. That's how the buds grow. That converted sugar is pumped up through the trees from the roots, and that's how the buds grow. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that at you, show you some old tap holes. They do end up drying out, so we do have to drill new ones. I don't know if I mentioned that before. And it certainly hasn't killed this tree. If you have good tapping practices, which I'm not so sure we did on this one. This one's right at the edge of a logging road. I think at one point we were gonna widen this logging road out. We had plans, and then the land got sold, so we kind of scrapped all our plans up here, not knowing what the new landowner was going to permit. But the old landowner was going to let us widen this road and do some work in here. It's all gotten washed out over the years. You can sort of see the ravine underneath. That's just nothing but washed out now. So anyway, that's just wanted to show you that in another section we're in. Some more main lines and lateral lines. Right now we're out back. This is a 1,500 gallon gathering tank, all stainless tank except for the frame. And we run vacuum, so we have to have some means of separating the vacuum from the atmospheric pressure. So this is what they call a releaser. Now this is a double barrel. So when the vacuum is drawing sap in on one barrel, the other barrel is atmospheric pressure, so it can release the sap and dump it in the tank. That's what the sap looks like as it's coming in. Usually doesn't spray in that hard, and we have a few leaks up in the woods that we're going to have to deal with, but we know that. There was wicked winds last night. It's getting ready to release right now. You can see the arm. There's a float in there. We'll let it release and I'll show you what it does. There it goes. So basically it just equalized the farther cylinder to atmosphere, and now I'm gathering the sap in this closer cylinder. And when that gets full, it'll raise the float and it'll switch back to the other cylinder, and it'll just do that all day long. When the sap is running really good, that thing will release in under a minute, every 50 seconds or so. I don't know if we'll be able to pick this up, but you can see the bubbles. Going through the lines, the sap's actually running pretty good. Better than I thought it was going to today. So this is just from this little section here, these lines. And it looks like when you have this air bubbles going really fast through the lines like that, it usually means there's a leak somewhere. we use these clear spouts adapters so we can see, and all I'd have to do is run along down through here, see which one is bubbling along pretty good, and that's where my leak is, but we'll do that later. So the sap's running. It's got to be pushing 40 degrees out here, and it is just a beautiful day. A little shot of the steam coming over the top of the sugar house through the cupola. We he must have just filled it and turned the blower back on. This thing does rain down sparks because of that blower. It's got such force, it just blows everything right out. Got to be real careful in the springtime when there's not any snow. We usually have a hose out here and do fire control all the time. But first run of the year, we're getting really low on sap here. Our old machine's chewing it up pretty quick, and we won't have much of a run for the first one, but that's okay. It's always good to just have a trial to work the kinks out of everything. Here's some of our dead pans over here. It's kind of our junkyard back here also. Some of the pans that we burned up over the years. I've always kind of hung on them thinking I'm going to fix them someday, and I will. So part of the process of making syrup is taking the water out of the sap. Right now we're running 1.5% sugar content in the sap, and we'll talk about that later. But I figured I'd show you the pans while I had the preheater hood off, so you can actually see inside them, or especially the back pan, because that's the most important one, because that does probably most of our boiling, 75% or more. So that's what this pan looks like inside. These divided sections we call flues. This is a raised flue pan, so when I say raised flue, I mean the flues in this pan are raised up inside the pan. In a drop flue pan, it would be flat and your flues would go down, drop below the bottom of the pan. But these are raised flue pans. These are 9-inch flues, and you can see how many of these flues there are per side. So 9 times however many of these up and down drops there are equals how much more boiling surface we have, and that's the advantage over a flat pan. Flat pan you'd have 2.5 by 5.5, I think is the dimensions of this back pan, but on this you have 5.5 times by whatever. I've never stopped to figure it out, but it's a lot. It's like, I want to say there's darn near 30 feet of pan in there, so there's sheet metal in there. So anyway, that makes up the back pan. The sap, it comes in the back into this divider box here. This is an old pan. It's in 1993. They've come out with some better designs since then. But the sap comes in this divider box, and one of these sides is plugged off, so it forces the raw sap or the concentrate down to this end of the pan, and then it has to flow all the way back around if we're feeding our front pan from that side to over there. So it gives it all that time and flowing to boil the water out. And once you get to the front pan here, since the level is a lot lower, we use a float assembly, which we'll show you once we get boiling. And the float assembly is what keeps the level in the front pan. And this is just a 4-section flat pan, 2.5 by 2.5. Our evaporator is not that big. When you talk evaporator, it's like how many size, how big's your operation? We talk in taps, the amount of taps, like I said before. But our evaporator is a 2.5 by 8. We don't need a huge evaporator because we have an RO machine, and we'll get to that later. But the level is controlled by a float. We keep it about 1.5 inches of liquid in here, and this is what sort of finishes it off and gets it to the syrup consistency. So once we start boiling, we'll show you that. But I thought I'd just run over this back pan because we put the preheater hood on here, and once we do that, you can't see in it. And next, we're going to put the preheater hood on now, and I will show you what that looks like and why we use a preheater. All right, so here's a front view with the preheater hood installed, and it is a homemade contraption that we put together years ago, but since it works very well, we just sort of left it the way it is and haven't modified it or upgraded it. So what happens is the cold sap comes in this pipe right here, and then it goes through this series of pipes. Well, it's one long pipe inside this preheater hood. So as the sap makes its way back and forth across here, the steam from the boiling sap in the back pan condenses on these pipes, exchanges the heat energy into the cold sap, and heats up the sap coming in to about 100 or 210 degrees. And it's usually whatever the ambient temperature is out, whatever temperature that will be, that's what we're feeding this thing. So we do that for efficiency. If we were putting in like 50-degree sap in here, all that boiling sap in the back would have to heat that from 40 degrees. Now it just has to go from 210 to 212. So it's way more efficient. We've picked up quite a few gallons per hour of process time just by installing this preheater hood. So as the steam condenses on these tubes, it drips off into this pan. The pan collects the condensate, which is usually about 180 degrees. And on the other side, there's a drain pipe that comes out, and we just collect it off into 5-gallon pails, and that's what we use to wash up at the end of the night. And that's what we use to wash our filters and stuff during the course of the process, which I'll show you later. This is the float box on the back pan. As the hot sap comes out into this box, there's a float that goes in there that maintains the level in the back pan, and we'll show you that once we get set up. So we're going to set up. We might even run some steam today. If not, that's okay. We will show you the rest of this process when we do get going. It's a little loud in here, but this is the RO machine, at least the face of it. This is what the rest of it looks like. I don't want to show you too much of this room because it's a super mess. But basically what this does is it takes the raw sap, brings it in. Right now it's about 1.5% sugar content. This gauge tells us we're running 1.5 gallons a minute of concentrate over into our 300-gallon tank in the sugar house, and we're running off 5 gallons a minute of pure water. We're running almost 400 psi, it looks like, and the rest of the knobs and dials on this thing are just for tuning it in. But this thing will do, it's supposed to do 500 to 600 gallons of sap an hour. I didn't do the math, but I don't think it's quite doing that. It's an older membrane. I was going to change it, but I thought I'd use it and see how it ran. I may end up changing it out just to get a little more speed out of it. We'll see how the season goes though. So this is where we keep our fresh water for rinsing and washing the RO machine. It's an 800-gallon tank. I picked it up for free. Somebody cut the top off from it. It was probably a 1,000-gallon tank at one time, but I think they said it wouldn't fit where they wanted it, so they just hacked the top off. Like I said, I picked it up for free. So that 5 gallons a minute of water gets run off, and when this is full, I just turn a valve on the machine and the water just goes to the ground. So that's about all there is to that process. Okay, so we got everything fired up here. And this is what it looks like when the rig is boiling. We put the covers on the preheater hood, and you can see right here that we're getting some water off of the preheater. Runs like that all night long as we're running sap through it. Up here we actually have an RO machine, and there's a 300-gallon tank up here we built a pedestal for that we run our concentrate into, and I will explain that process later, but I thought I'd just show you guys what this operation looks like while it's boiling. And here's those floats that I was talking about. You can see that it controls the flow of sap coming in from the back pan, and then in this pan over here there's another float assembly that controls the flow from the concentrate tank. So as the water boils off, the level drops, the float drops, and it starts to let in fresh sap. Over here we just have a level gauge that tells, because we can't see in the back of our pan, this gives us an indication of how our level is. We don't ever want our level to drop too low, otherwise it'll expose the joints in the pan and the heat will melt the solder. These are all soldered pans. I think the front pan's actually a welded pan we switched over a couple years ago. The front pan's a lot newer than the back. Like I said, the back pan's a 1993. I'm not sure what the front pan is. It's only a couple years old. We tend to ruin our front pans quite often. But that's just the name of the game. Anyway, I'll be back when we start to draw some syrup off, and we will show you the rest of the process. Steve is over here putting some more wood in it. We burn wood. And under here we actually have a blower. You can see a spare one. We have this little blower. You can't really see it. Light's not good, but there's a blower that blows air in underneath the fire in there, and it makes it burn a lot hotter. It's kind of messy in here. We didn't really sweep the floors and all that stuff, but it's a storage shed in the summer. We only use this about 16 to 20 times a year for this, so the rest of the time it's a storage shed. And that's what it looks like. The old steam's coming out of there. Pretty good. We can process about 90 gallons of sap an hour on this. The front of this arch is called an airtight front. It's not super airtight. You can see the sparks coming out of it, but just need to doctor the seal up on the door a little bit, but that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything. So once the syrup gets to about 219 degrees, we pour it off into this pot. And then what we do from there is we take the pot and we bring it over here and dump it in this other pot. This takes about 1.5 of those. And then this is where we filter the syrup. So when the syrup comes off, it's concentrated with all the mineral and sugar sands and all that stuff that goes with the sap. And we have to filter all that out. So we do use a filter aid. So we mix up this pot with some filter aid. We make sure the density is right. The state requires it to be at a certain density. We use the syrup hydrometer for that. And then it's filtered through this little rig here. This is a lapse filter. And from there it goes into our canner. And from the canner we reheat it back up to 185 degrees, and we either put it in 5-gallon pails, which are down there. There's a couple of pails there, or we can it off into containers for sale. And that's about it. That's the whole process. I will, as soon as I filter this through, it's very loud, so I'm not gonna show you the process. There's not much to see. There's a little gear pump down there, which is very noisy. It just goes in really cloudy and comes out really clear. And then once I run this through, I'll show you how we grade it, because it has to be graded after. All right, well, I have a break in the action. So this is a grading kit, and that would be considered, well, they changed the grade. So golden delicate, amber rich, that's what we made right now. First draw is always dark, and then dark robust. So what we do is we compare the two, and that is just a little bit darker than that, so we gotta call it robust. So it has to be equal to or lighter than. So it's definitely not equal to or lighter than the lighter grades. I don't know what's going on with my camera here, but it is a little darker than that. And we'll compare it to what we finished up making the other day, which is that one right there. And that's a considerable bit lighter than that. And those two are almost right on the money. So that's how we grade. On the top of these, you can see they're written so I don't forget what they are. But that's how we grade our syrup, and that's how clear it comes out of that filter. So that's pretty much it. That's how you make maple syrup. One thing I will add right here at the end while I feed the fire is that basically all making maple syrup is putting a hole in a tree, in a maple tree, having some means of collecting the sap that runs out of it, and then boiling that sap down until you get syrup. That's all there is to it. You don't need all this fancy equipment, and believe me, the equipment I have isn't that fancy compared to some operations. Changing my wash water here and putting another bucket under there. But if you wanted to go make maple syrup and you had a few maple trees, you can use anything to collect sap. Milk jugs, 5-gallon pails, just make sure they're food grade. You don't want to use an old sheetrock mud bucket. Well, you could if you wanted to. Not recommended. But that's all you need. And then a lot of people use a turkey fryer in a small propane tank. That's all you need. Anything to boil water. I definitely wouldn't suggest boiling all this in the house, especially if you have wallpaper. That's a surefire way to not have wallpaper. You will be putting tons and tons of steam in the house, because depending on what the sugar content is, you could be boiling off darn near 40 gallons of sap or more to make 1 gallon of syrup. So that's it in a nutshell.